You're listening to The Dead Prussian, a podcast about war and warfare.
G'day everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Dead Prussian podcast. I'm your host Mick, and today I've got an interesting interview for you. But before we get to that, I'd like to thank all the listeners out there for their support. It was approximately thrice what was expected, and as you know, thrice is a very impressive number. Please keep the feedback coming. As always, I caveat that with be gentle, I am but a man. You can also leave reviews on the iTunes site, which will improve the pickup and the amount of people actually listening to this podcast about war and warfare. Rightio, time for me to get to the topic of this episode, Marie Von Clausewitz. I was lucky enough to interview Miss Vanya Eftimova Bellinger, whose book I bought and started reading. The book is called Marie Von Clausewitz, The Woman Behind the Making of On War. A quick shout out to the guys over at the Strategy Bridge who have run a series of articles over the past week or two on Marie Von Clausewitz and her influence on Clausewitz and his work. They got my attention. I read the book. Vanya got my attention, and I was lucky enough to do this interview. The best thing about this interview was that you learn everything from the fact that Marie was quite an intellectual in her own right, a large influence on Carl, and less of a prude in the bedroom than he was, although because we have a clean podcast, we don't go into too much of the saucy details. Well, that's enough of me prattling on. I'll now cut to midnight last Saturday. Evening everyone, it's Mick here, and I'm sitting down with Vanya Eftimova Bellinger, and I'm going to ask her a few questions about a book she's written. Now, Carl von Clausewitz is our favourite writer. His work on war is the framework we're using. However, none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for his wife, Marie von Clausewitz. She's not as well known as Carl, and the reason for that is because she went to great efforts to promote him throughout his lifetime and also after his death. But the truth is, his book would not have been published if it wasn't for her. Vanya's written a book about Marie, and it's all about how she and Carl were intellectual equals and the way that they worked together to talk about his theories, think about his theories, and in the end, Marie was responsible for producing the book that we all know and has influenced militaries the world over. Evening, Vanya. How are you?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for coming on the show. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in journalism, both your time in Europe, a little bit about your time in the US, and also what motivated you to write a book about Marie von Clausewitz?
Well, like you said, I'm originally from Bulgaria, and I went to language school, and these are type of fancy type schools in Bulgaria, and mine was very small, not that fancy, not that prominent, but I learned to speak really good German, and this obviously served me well. Then I graduated from Sofia University's journalism school. I actually started working as a reporter already in high school, and I worked throughout my years in college and actually ended up on national television. But Bulgaria is a very small country, and it's easy to become famous, but it's a lot harder to do the things you want to do. And in my case, it was to do international journalism. So I left for Berlin, worked for a number of years as a freelancer. Then I met my husband, who is a US soldier, and he was stationed back in Germany. We married, we moved to the United States, and it was kind of hard time for me to find my way. Being in new society, I didn't speak English that well back then. So as a way to integrate into that society, I decided to do master. And we're a military family, so we move a lot around the country. And Norwich University, which is a very small university in the state of Vermont, actually offered for me the best conditions. And the program was military history. By that time, I already knew who is Clausewitz. You cannot be an international journalist and not know who is Clausewitz, because especially around 2001, 2002, 2003, these huge debates about the war on terrorism, and Clausewitz kept coming. So I bought my first copy, I think, in German around 2005. And I started reading it back then, but then I left it on the side. And so now in grad school, military history, military theory, it's front, center, back, it's Clausewitz. So I went back to reading on war, and then sort of started getting interested. Who's that guy? Why he wrote this? Why his book speaks so much to me? Because many of the passages I felt like he wrote this for our time. So I started reading Peter Porret's biography of Clausewitz, and then Peter Porret keeps mentioning Marie, but not discussing a lot about Marie, simply because there was also not a lot of documents. So I was like, well, that sounds interesting. I should probably go and study Marie. And I had this professor back then, John T. Kuhn, and he was like, oh yeah, Vanya, you should go and do it. That's kind of a little bit the difference between Europe and United States. In Europe, everybody will be like, so why you think you can do this book? While in the United States, everyone is like, oh, go ahead, do it. So that's great,
That's excellent.
So in 2012, July, we went back to Europe, and we stayed in Berlin. And I said to my husband, I'm going to go and visit a couple of archives and see what they have. And then the archivists came with these boxes, and no one has opened them for a very long time, but there was nothing, actually, not enough for biography. And, and I guess they felt a little bit sorry for me because I came all the way from the States and they couldn't offer me anything. So they said, like, well, you can write your email here. And if something were to come someday and so on, we'll contact you. So no hope at all. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? And then comes December and we're again on vacation, and then I get this email from the director of the Prussian State Private Archives, Geheimes Staatsarchiv in Berlin, and she's like, hello, Mrs. Bellinger, are you still working on this idea about Marie von Clausewitz? Because we just got the boxes from, we got the archives of an old aristocratic German family, and inside there is the complete intimate correspondence between Marie and Karl von Clausewitz. Because this family, the Butlers, are actually the direct descendants of Marie's brother, Friedrich von Brühl. So actually I was very lucky.
Yeah, lucky timing for you.
Yeah, like I always say I'm a little bit like Forrest Gump in this story. Things happen to me, Like somehow things happen to me, and
writing's like a box of chocolates. That's a excellent story of how a little bit of perseverance can pay off in the end with just a little bit of luck mixed in. Reading the preface of On War, everyone knows that's written by his wife. She makes it very clear, and she also highlights that it's might be seen as strange by people. She was obviously writing in 1830s, thinking that a woman was publishing this book, and then having left the rest of the work to be what we see as Karl's voice, but quite obviously a lot of Marie's voice was wrapped within there as well. the introduction to your book, I'm just going to read the first sentence because I think it's a great sentence. It is one of history's great ironies that the West's seminal treatise on war, an activity traditionally inseparable from the constructions of masculinity, was edited and published by a woman. For our listeners out there, can you just go over the role that Marie Von Clausewitz played in publishing Karl's work?
Well, we always knew that Marie published on war after Clausewitz's untimely death, which was like a great shock for her. She never expected that she will have to do this job. And she actually did a lot of mistakes, then tried to fix many of them, and it was very hard on her. But she did it very loyally, and she basically devoted her life, the rest of her life, on this task, because she could have had a really nice life without publishing on war, because she got a job working for the royal family. After Clausewitz's death, she could have just, leaving those drafts on the side or giving them to some of Clausewitz's male friends. Many of them were veterans from the Napoleonic Wars. She could have just said, like, okay, do that thing, and I'll live my life as a lady in waiting, which she was actually, and governess of the Crown Prince, which was like very, very high position. But, she decided that that was her task, that was her duty to go and publish on war. She also believed that she's the only one who knew exactly what Clausewitz had in mind. Remember, he died, and he left all his papers, but no clear copies, because he was a messy writer. He kept... Yeah, that's true. Throughout their correspondence, she keeps complaining, that he lost documents, and or he debated ideas with her, and then he never wrote them down into the essays he was working on. And then she goes, because she kept getting all his papers, wherever he went, she kept safeguarding the papers, and she's like, goes over that essay, and then she noticed that the ideas they debated, they were never written down in that essay. And that's exactly what happened with On War. She opens it, and it's a mess. But because she was always involved, he always debated with her these ideas, she felt that she's the one who knows how to do it. And that's why her brother assisted her, Fritz von Brühl, and then she got involved to other men in the process, which were Gröben, Karl von der Gröben, and Major von Oetzl. Who were very close to her. But all these three men, no one of them ever questioned that Marie was the leading force. She was the one who decided how it's going to be, and how it's going to be published. And basically, she could have said, let's heavily edit this text. I know what Clausewitz wanted to put in that text, so she could have actually went through those papers and edit them really heavily. But she actually decided, no, we're going to keep them the way they were left. And actually, 20 years later, when was the second edition of On War, her brother Fritz actually did just that. He edited heavily the text. But Marie, she wanted to publish the papers just as they were. And in this way, she actually wanted to promote the idea that On War, it's not a prescription how to win a war, but to understand war. So, and there is the preface for the first part. It's for the first part is very famous. But then there is another preface which she wrote 1835 for another part of the book, and another part of Clausewitz's works, and where she explains that people should read on war and realize that it's unfinished. It's an unfinished book, but precisely because it's unfinished and they're gonna debate that book and gonna think about the peculiarity of this work, this will bring them to better understanding of war. So she went basically one step further in the process of editing on war. She opened the text to interpretations and tried to encourage people to go and debate that book and debate what is war, and not just read that book as a prescription how to win one war.
Yeah, which in the revision notes that Carl left before he died, he made it very clear that if he died early, which inevitably happened, that the text itself was not complete and it was worth debating, reading, even disagreeing with. It's very, very interesting to see that, you know, the first person, and arguably there's a lot of people that haven't understood that point. Marie was very clear in her publishing of that. This is what he's done. He wants people to think about it, which, you know, it's a better way to stick to the legacy that he was trying to leave behind by saying, hey, I don't have all the answers, but this is what I think about things. That is a massive effort for a woman in 19th century Prussia. She was an aristocratic woman, and she went on to become the governess of the Crown Prince, as you mentioned. She was also seen as quite an intellectual powerhouse in her own time, from what I understand reading through your book. What was Carl's views on women? Because at that time, to be an aristocrat, a military man, to have such a forthright wife, he must have been what would have been termed back then fairly liberal with his views on his wife's involvement in the intellectual spheres in Prussia.
This is actually one of the surprises, and in my view, one of the most interesting but understudied aspects of Clausewitz's life and work. Okay, it will be anachronism to call him feminist, you know.
Yeah.
Simply that wasn't back then, you know, and he wasn't like, campaigning for female rights and things like this, simply because there was like other times and so on. But it's surprising, but he actually took Marie very seriously, and he always treated her as his equal. But not only Marie, actually, there was scores of women around him, intellectual women, which he actually took very seriously, and many of them actually left very positive, heartwarming accounts about him, which tells you, you know, that he was a man ahead of his time. But, you know, these were times, actually, French Revolution, we keep seeing it in one light, and actually it was quite a messy time, because you have this idea for men's rights and so on, but many of these progressive men and so on, they were not. They fought for their rights, but did not see the women around them as their equals. And so many of these women in 18th century, late 18th century, and early 19th century, we have scores of these intellectual women, many of them really powerful, many of them really influential, playing great role in European politics. And many men were very hostile to this idea and tried to exclude women. And basically there was this masculinity was built on the idea that if you fought, then you can be a citizen, then you can vote. So then you should have a say, you know, in your country's future. And obviously women were excluded from that. Although actually, when you read Marie's correspondence, she and scores of other women were spent so much time in military camps. They did not fight, but they were in the military camps, and they worked and they supported these efforts and so on. But the idea was very masculine, and but Clausewitz wasn't that type of man, and we nowhere in the correspondence, nowhere in memoirs and their contemporaries, we have that Clausewitz ever tried to. Never appeared concerned or bothered by Marie's activism. She actually bothered a lot of other people in Berlin. Her activism and opinions really bothered, their contemporaries. There is like very unflattering, descriptions of Marie.
Mm.
But Clausewitz was not that type of man, probably because he understood much better, these complex socio-economic conditions that, politics, women always played a role in politics and will continue to play a role in politics. And since he understood all these things, he kept also this exaggerated language of masculinity out of his books. And there's if you read on war, if you start reading on war from feminist point of view, then you start seeing that he also criticized on certain parts actually this exaggerated opinion of men and manhood and so on. And there is like war is no pastime, and it is no mere joy in daring and winning, not place for irresponsible enthusiasts. And if you read like passages like this, you start seeing that he criticized this foolish and dangerous glorification of war, but also a visible attack on the romanticized masculine notion of combat.
Yeah, that was probably part of the reform movement. Scharnhorst was leading the charge with to make the officer corps more professional rather than the typical system that was in place of buying commissions and officers leading up to corps level just based on their family name. So it seems that Clausewitz always surrounded himself with smart women, and my follow-on question, which I think is probably quite easy to answer for out there, but it seems that in Carl's view, his wife would have been the most natural person to take over his work and actually see it through to publication.
She was the closest to him.
Two areas where she also dabbled. She was a bit of an amateur artist, and also she did some political reporting or liaison for some of the senior political figures in Prussia, including Karl's superiors, which is a little strange even for now. I don't imagine there's too many military spouses out there that send official reports back to the commanding officers of their husbands. Can you tell me a little bit about any of her artwork that listeners in Europe might be able to go see, and also a little bit about her reports that she'd send back to Prussia itself?
Marie, she was an amateur artist. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to track any one of her works, save for the portrait she painted of August von Gneisenau, which is now in the permanent collection of the German Historical Museum in Berlin. But we know that she kept painting throughout their lives, and actually Clausewitz really liked to write while Marie was painting, and kind of relaxed him, especially during campaigning, because especially in 1813, 1814, 1815, she spent a lot of time in a military camp with him. Yeah. So he really liked, it was a very stressful time for Clausewitz, and seeing his wife sitting and painting and so on that kind of relaxed him, and he left like a lot of there is a lot of passages in their correspondence where he muses about her painting and so on. That's one of the things he really enjoyed. And he, thanks to Marie, he actually developed this really strong interest in the arts. And we see at the end of his life, actually in the decade in Berlin, that he became actually really interested, like professionally interested in the arts, and wrote, there's a couple of essays where he wrote on fine arts and even inner design, which is like almost like he was like director of the Prussian War College, but was penning essays on inner design and how people feel about.
Design's a very popular concept for military political planning these days. So once again, Carl's ahead of the rest of us.
Yeah, but I mean, people knew that she. That's one of the things that actually drew Clausewitz in the beginning to Marie, was like her political activism. That she knew so many things. He admired her, that she knows so many people, that she knows politics so well. That he actually, I mean, quite. He used those connections. There is like times again and again when he gives her, ask her, can you help me with that promotion, and can you ask people for position over there for me, and can you write this guy, can you research, is there an opening for me in for the to go to the Netherlands or to Austria. There was like at some point he was thinking all these things to switch services. So he would like give her tasks to go and research these things, simply because she was really good at that. And then of course she was like really good as a historian, and he could have asked someone from his staff to go and do, some type of research for him. But then, he sends to, especially 1831, there is a letter where he's like, oh, can you go and research for me, the history of Luxembourg? And, she was like, at that time she was swamped with other things. And so she sends him a report from somebody else, like a generic thing, and she sends it to him, and he is like, I would have, and he writes back and says like, I would have preferred that you write this, because you would have made it much better, and because she was much better than, all his stuff and so on. And Gneisenau, the famous German war hero, he constantly used Marie for information, and to gather for him information. That's not only that report from 1820s, I'm sorry, where he asked her to go and write about the political situation in Saxony, because Marie and Karl went to Saxony on a trip. And by the way, Karl was also on that trip, but Gneisenau asked Marie for a report, which should tell you something about the whole.
That's quite interesting. I mean, there wouldn't be too many people who would have thought that would have occurred, in 19th century Prussia, or Saxony, as it were.
It wasn't unusual, actually. There was like, I again say, there was like scores of political women, and all these great political men, all these military men, great military men, they actually used those women. They were like, there was not such a stigma about it, I think somehow we have now this separation between military and civilian realm, but there was not such a stigma back then to go and ask one of the wives to go and get you information, because she actually will do it much better than your staff, Yeah,
it's shows a very pragmatic use of their resources when they know that Marie will deliver them a much better product than Karl, who probably would never have finished his report if his writing's anything to go by. it seems that Carl and Marie were almost a match made in heaven, intellectual equals. Marie was more connected than Carl was, and it took a while for Marie's father to come around to letting Carl in the door and marry Marie. Was it a marriage of convenience, and this is the soppy side in me, a marriage born out of love, or was it more due to the political benefits that Carl could get from marrying above his station?
Marie and Carl were most definitely in love.
That's
True
good.
love, deep love, also passionate love. Passages in their correspondence are very, well, they're not saucy, but, abused,
I
we
don't have to
should
put
say.
an explicit title on the podcast.
Well, Clausewitz was a small town boy, so he was prudish. Marie was the one more, how should I say, more open to things like this, or at least in writing. In writing, it's yeah. Anyway, let's move on.
No, it's actually it's good to hear that it was a loving and passionate love affair. However, we'll move on to something so we don't let all our listeners go too red-faced. What was the most interesting fact you discovered about Marie and Carl while doing the research and writing your book?
It might sound strange, but actually, how normal Marie and Carl were.
That does sound strange.
Somehow we always expect that great minds should be difficult, torn, eccentric people, even awful human beings, and we have somehow to explain their awfulness, but also their greatness and so on. But in Marie and Carl's case, they were kind, loving, decent people. They had their weaknesses, of course, but generally they were really nice people. And they were incredibly smart, witty, and sophisticated people. Like people you would love to have as dinner guests in your house. But, the world around them was politically polarized and absurd and sometimes violent and vicious. And this is what made them sad, and that's why we see that sadness in their letters. It's not that it's always like Clausewitz, like, oh, such a depressed and so on, which, wasn't really the case. If you read my diary, you will probably think I'm really depressed and so on. But people always have to make a distinction what you put on paper and what you actually feel. Sometimes on paper you put your darkest feelings and your darkest thoughts and so on, but in real life you're not that unhappy and so on. So that's like the normality of Marie and Carl.
Well, that's good to know. That's some hope out there for some of us very, very, very normal people. Maybe we'll also rise to the achievement of Carl and managing to not publish a book and have someone finish it for us. I'll move on to my final question. Now, this is a question that goes to all guests that appear on the Dead Prussian podcast, and it's part of our quest to follow in Carl's footsteps in his first chapter of his book, the only one that he finished and revised. I ask all my guests to finish the sentence, "War is." So could you give us a offering of the sentence, "War is"?
I won't be very original. I'm just go with Clausewitz. It's merely continuation of politics with other means. But it's very simple sentence, but it's very complex sentence, and we keep forgetting, and that's why I think we keep having these debates about wars and foreign policy and so on. Is because we still we know they sent us, but we still keep forgetting how important it is to see politics as continuation, to see war as a political activity, and that we have to have in mind what's the end game, what we want to achieve, with war.
I couldn't think of a more perfect Clausewitzian answer. Vanya, thank you very much for your time, for appearing on the podcast. And for those listeners out there, you can pick up Vanya's book, Marie Von Clausewitz, The Woman Behind the Making of On War, from Amazon. It comes in multiple formats. I myself took advantage of the Kindle format. There's also the other formats out there. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gents. That was the interview between myself and Miss Vanya Eftimova Bellinger about Marie Von Clausewitz, the woman behind the making of On War. I encourage you all to go out there and grab a copy of the book. It is a great read. It's a pretty quick read, especially for those of us who have to skip over the big words for risk of having to sound them out using our syllables. Again, thanks everyone for their comments and feedback. For those interested in the soundtrack, the style of music is slam funk. It is a style of music that I am not intimately familiar with. In fact, I know one song from this style, and that is the one playing now, Caught in the Beat, by Broke for Free. If you have any slam funk tunes you think I should be listening to, feel free to send them to me. That's all for this episode of the Dead Prussian Podcast. So until next time, grab a book and crack on.
On the next episode of the Dead Prussian Podcast, Mick discusses the career of Carl von Clausewitz with Dr. Donald Stoker, a professor of strategy and policy for the US Naval War College.
I can place him in 36 battles. Clausewitz is also not telling us how to fight wars. He tells us how to think about fighting wars. But the most memorable day of his life was the Battle of Lutzen, where he took a bayonet to the head.
That's a pretty memorable event.
Join the conversation with us on Twitter at Dead Prussian Pod, on Facebook at the Dead Prussian page, or on our website www.thedeadprussian.com. All show notes for this episode, as well as copyright information, can be found on the website. The Dead Prussian Podcast is written, produced and hosted by Mick Cook. It is co-produced by Amanda Levito. The music used throughout is Caught in the Beat by Broke for Free and is used under a Creative Commons Attribution license. All opinions expressed by individuals on the podcast are those of the individual and not necessarily representative of any other organisation.